So, our time this morning begins with a confession. My wife Emily and I, when we bought our first house together, we decided that we were going to live in the East Cobb section, which is a northern suburb in between between Roswell and Marietta, and it is a relatively affluent suburb. And we were blessed to be able to afford to buy a house in that part of the world. And I'm going to get to the confession. I had a long list of things that we were looking for as we decided where to be, and they really were mostly about where our kids would go to school and what that would look like. And once again, we were blessed to be able to choose that. And as I got to learn more and more about specifically the Walton High School area of East Cobb, there was one thing that was sort of at the bottom of my list, but it probably was more important than I was really willing to admit at the time, and it was this. In the Walton district of Cobb County, there is one apartment complex, and it sits on the Chattahoochee River, and the rents aren't cheap. Now, if I'm really even more transparent with you, I really didn't want to be in a community where there was a lot of apartment people. Growing up, I wouldn't describe our family as poor, but when my mom and dad got divorced, and my mom and I and my brother moved into what mom could afford, we went from living in a house on Lake Forest Drive to an apartment complex that was right where Roswell Road and 285 meet. And just to say it, a lot of sketchiness was going on in that apartment complex. I can remember one night in particular where I woke up in the middle of the night. I thought I'd heard something, and when I opened my door, I heard noise happening in our living room area, and then the front door shut. And so literally someone had broken into our house and for whatever reason decided when they heard someone wrestling to get out. And that was just one story of many. But if I'm even more transparent, the real confession is this. I just didn't want to be around poor people. Like, we could afford to live in a nice suburb. We could afford to live in a great school district. And I was making a choice that I didn't want to be around poor people. I could use the excuse at this moment in my life that I was not walking with the Lord, which is really very true. But I just didn't want to have any sort of going back into that sketchy world. Now that I could afford to not live in sketch, it was like, let's choose that. But here's the thing. It's important for me to say that not only was my perception false and not of the Lord, it was potentially going to prevent me from living into the role that the Lord was preparing for me. So this is our last week in the Joshua series. We have called it Entrusted because Joshua is one of these really rare biblical characters that, at least to the extent that we know, did not have any sort of major moral failing. Did he get everything right? No, but y'all, he got most everything right. And because of that, he was a great steward of everything that the Lord put into his care. And yet, with all the things that we have talked about, all the amazing ways that Joshua was entrusted with much and stewarded it really well, he got this last part very right. And what we're going to talk about today, if we don't figure out how to get on board with this stewardship, what we have been trusted with that matters more than anything else, the rest of our stewardship just is kind of minimal in comparison, okay? And so, we, like Joshua, have been entrusted with relationships to other people. Today we're going to use Joshua as a good role model, and that we are not just entrusted with the relationships that we are bound to by marriage and by blood, but we have all been entrusted with relationships. And especially for our time this morning, I want you to consider that we have also been entrusted with relationships to people who we might never choose to be connected to. So here's a few examples of how Joshua was entrusted to relationships, and not just people that he had to have relationships with. Before the Israelites conquered the city of Jericho, Joshua sent spies. 2 spies. Now, I've always been curious, but I'm going to leave this curiosity up to you. It's so interesting to me why apparently the first house they stopped in was Rahab the prostitute. You can draw your own conclusions with that. But what we do know is that somehow, probably just because the gift of God's presence in her life, Rahab knew. She knew that these people that were gathering outside the city walls were, in fact, super special, and that there was something going on with them and the Lord that they were following that was different. So much so that she was convinced that when these spies came into her house, that she needed to help them. Now, because she was probably a very resourceful person, she decided that she would try to make a bargain with them. If I protect you and care for you, and she did it so well that she actually lied to her king who also seemed to have a personal connection to Rahab. Once again, you can draw your own conclusions with what's going on there. But she made a deal with these two spies, basically put her very vulnerable family on the line and said, hey, if I protect you, will you care for me and my family? Will you protect us when you overthrow this city? Now, it's important to know that even throughout the chosen people, the Israelite story, there were lots of kings and leaders who could care less about vulnerable people. There were lots of kings and leaders who were a part of God's chosen people that would just do whatever they had to do to maintain power and control. And yet Joshua was not that person. So in Joshua 6, we hear him give instructions back to the two spies. This is Joshua 6, verse 22. Meanwhile, Joshua said to the two spies, keep your promise. Go to the prostitute's house and bring her out along with all her family. The men who had been spies went in and brought out Rahab, her father, mother, brothers, and all the other relatives who were with her. They moved her whole family to a safe place near the camp of Israel. Then the Israelites burned the town and everything in it. Only the things made from silver, gold, bronze, or iron were kept for the treasury of the Lord's house. So Joshua spared Rahab the prostitute and her relatives who were with her in the house because she had hidden the spies Joshua had sent to Jericho. And she lives among the Israelites to this day. Many of you also know that the reason why Rahab is pointed out is that she is a part of the lineage which the Lord will use in a mighty and great way. Okay? But here's the thing. Rahab and her family were completely vulnerable. Joshua could have, as the king, done anything that he wanted. Just said, thanks for helping the spies, but we're done with you and your time on this earth has ended. And he didn't. He instead decided to keep the promise and care for this vulnerable family in this moment. Now later on, when Joshua is parsing out the land to the different tribes, that is part of what Nathan talked about last week. This comes to us in Joshua 17. Joshua is faced with the family of Zelophehad. Zelophehad had no sons, only daughters. And so these daughters come to Joshua, once again, very vulnerable, and made a request. And the request was this, that there was a statute that came from Moses, which meant that it came from the Lord, that a family who had no male heirs was still entitled to rights around property and possession. I hope that you understand that at this moment in time, this is almost miracle-ish. All of the neighboring countries and societies and cultures, women, unless they were royalty, had no rights to anything. Now, I don't want to paint the picture that somehow the Israelites were not a patriarchal culture, because they were. And yet the reality that there were rights given to women, especially vulnerable women, is really unique. And once again, Joshua could have done anything. He could have just said, you know what, thanks so much. What a great thing that you're bringing to me. But you know what? No, the land will just go to whoever. And when your dad's gone, sorry, don't need to worry about you. Instead, because I think we've seen time and time again that Joshua is a man of honor, he honored their request and took care of this very vulnerable family and honored the rights that they had. And finally, let's hear this story from Joshua 20. This is Joshua 20, beginning at verse 1. The Lord said to Joshua, "Now tell the Israelites to designate cities of refuge, as I instructed Moses. Anyone who kills another person accidentally and unintentionally can run to one of these cities. They will be places of refuge from relatives seeking revenge for the person who was killed. Upon reaching one of these cities, the one who caused the death will appear before the elders at the city gate and present his case. They must allow him to enter the city and give him a place to live among them. If the relatives of the victim come to avenge the killing, the leaders must not release the slayer to them, for he killed the other person unintentionally and without previous hostility. But the slayer must stay in that city and tried by the local assembly, who then will render a judgment. And he must continue to live in that city until the death of the high priest who was in office at the time of the accident. After that, he is free to return to his own home in the town from which he fled." In all of these stories, y'all, Joshua is reflecting the heart of God, who cares desperately for vulnerable people. Y'all, we worship and serve a God who cares and has from the very beginning cared about vulnerable people. Joshua was an excellent leader, and I believe that one of the reasons why he really was a very honorable man who, at least according to our knowledge, did not have any major moral failings was because he was super obedient. Like if the Lord had given a statute, he didn't try to second guess it, and especially when it came to people who were vulnerable, he took care of them. Now, my favorite story in this book about how God is in for the vulnerable comes to us from Deuteronomy 10. We're going to get there in just a minute. This is one of a couple places in Scripture that gives us a story of God commissioning the second set of 10 commandments. If you remember, Moses comes down after spending, 40 days on the mountain with the Lord with the first set of 10 commandments. He comes down and finds the people have built a golden calf. And he's like, I can't even leave you alone for just a few days, and this is what you do. Like he was carrying words from God to help them form their culture and society in a way that honored God, and he was so upset that he just threw them on the ground and they shattered. But it's also important for us to always remember that we worship a God who is in to give us other chances. All right? So here's the story from Deuteronomy 10:17 as Moses is coming down with the second set of commandments. Deuteronomy 10, verse 17. There it is. "For the Lord your God is the God of gods and Lord of lords. He is the great God, the mighty and awesome God who shows no partiality and cannot be bribed. He ensures that orphans and widows receive justice. He shows love to the foreigners living among you and gives them food and clothing. So you, too, must show love to foreigners. For you yourselves were once foreigners in the land of Egypt. You must fear the Lord your God and worship him and cling to him. Your oaths must be in his name alone. He alone is your God, the only one who is worthy of your praise, the one who has done these mighty miracles that you have seen with your own eyes." So when Jesus came to this world and started doing things that for a lot of the religious leaders did not make a lot of sense, he wasn't doing some new thing. The fact that Jesus chose over and over and over again to spend time with people who were vulnerable, to spend time with people who were considered unclean, to spend time with people who were strangers or foreigners, he was not doing a new thing. He was simply reflecting the heart of God, who cares desperately for vulnerable people. He was reflecting the heart of God, who is for people, and especially for people who are going through a vulnerable time, like widows and orphans, like strangers or foreigners in your land. And y'all, I'm not here to make a political statement, but it matters. It matters how we care for people who are vulnerable. It matters. And we should be the people that figure out how to enforce and enact the law, but do it in a way that provides mercy for people who are vulnerable. It matters. These are some words that Jesus said in Luke 14, verse 13. He said, when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you'll be blessed. You're about to hear a bit of the end of the story that will help you understand, and I'm trying to convey to you today that when we choose to care for vulnerable people, it will not be easy, it will be difficult, but it will bring blessings. It will bring blessings. In Matthew 19, Jesus says these words, let the little children come to me and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these. Y'all, it is only in really recent history that children have become as valuable as they are in our culture and society. It really is the only last few generations that children carry great value, whether they are helpful for the family business or not. Because at this moment in time, children are not considered to be super precious and amazing. They are an asset which hopefully at some point in time will lead to being helpful to whatever the family business is. And yet Jesus knew that children were sometimes the most vulnerable of all, and that the kingdom of heaven belongs to even them. And then out of Matthew 25, which is where we get great instructions about what it means for us as followers of Christ to go into a hurting and lost world and visit people who are in prison, care for people who are sick, give the coats off our back and care for those who don't have a roof over their head or have enough food on the table. This is where we get all these instructions, and it kind of culminates with this statement. Jesus says, truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did it for me. You did it for me. So the role that the Lord was preparing for me was to be called into becoming a pastor. I got my calling in 2005. I received my first appointment in the United Methodist Church in 2007. Our family was still living in our amazing, wonderful community in East Cobb at that time, and my appointment was in West Cobb. There are plenty of areas in West Cobb that are amazing and wonderful, but the church that I was appointed to was not one of them. Our church was surrounded by rental homes, tons of apartments, several mobile home parks. Let me just say it, our church was surrounded by poor people, exactly the people that I'd spent a decade trying to live my life apart from. And yet the Lord had called me to be a pastor. And my understanding of pastor is that yes, it is very much a part of caring for those who are within the walls. But as many of you know, I believe really strongly that pastors are called to communities. And that means that we're called to the whole community. And I think it's no surprise, at least from the Lord's perspective, that he decided to take this East Cobb snob person and place them into a community that was filled with people that he had tried to avoid. And so the Lord had invited me to start figuring out what that looks like. And thank God that he does not leave us where he found us. So we have a picture to show you now. This is a picture of a family. You might recognize the little girl in this family. That is Jaden. And yes, she looks very different today than how she did back then. This is her when she was about 3 or 4. Many of you know that Jaden is our youngest daughter. She has been in our home and under our care since she was 5. She is now 17, going on 30 right now. The other people in this photo are her mother, Amy, and her grandmother, Denise. This family showed up at one of our outreach events. We used to throw a breakfast with Santa. This family showed up. They were a ragtag bunch when they showed up. And one of the rare moments for me, this church has been a real blessing in that we do outreach events and then people come back to church. That was not my experience in that first church. It felt like we would do outreach events and people would be glad that we were doing them, but then we would never see them again. This family was different. And somehow, some way, Denise felt a connection to our church. And truthfully, I think she felt a connection to me. And so she started coming to our church. Whenever she was in a good place, she would come. She would almost always bring Jaden. And just to say it, because Denise was an unbelievably gifted evangelist, she would always bring neighbors and friends. Always bring neighbors and friends. And so I got to know Denise, who was poor and struggling and lived surrounded by tons of dysfunction. It was hard at times to care for her, really hard. And don't misunderstand, some of her struggles were because of her own poor choices, but much of what she was struggling was this. She just didn't have enough resources to cover herself or her family when some bad thing happened. And so that simply made her slip farther down into the pit. And she had a terrible tribe. Her tribe was just filled with people who really were all broken and just trying to take advantage of one another. Like, it was just awful at times. So it was not easy to care for Denise and her family, but I learned over time this. Denise deserved my best. She deserved my best. And she challenged me in a way that no other family challenged me to give her my best. And the Lord used her in an unbelievably powerful way to change my heart and to help me reconcile that people are people. And they're always going to be people. And that we're always supposed to figure out how to care for all the people that the Lord has placed in our lives. And here's a truth that's still hard for me to say this day. We did not help Denise with much of anything from the physical world on this side of eternity. In fact, I could just make a strong argument from the time that I met her and even from the time that I really became her pastor and got integrated into her life, things got worse for her. So much so that she passed at a really early age. At the time that she passed, her daughter Amy was in prison. And so that was the beginning of the story of our family with Jaden. The story of our family and Jaden is a story for another day. I will just say this. We have been blessed beyond words to do our best to try to care for her, but it has been unbelievably hard at times. And yet the Lord is good and faithful, and He uses us, especially when we're willing to enter into really difficult times. But Denise, maybe more than any other person at that first church, changed me and helped me find my way. I cannot express how much she helped me find my way. So much. She helped me get over my prejudice towards poor people so that I could pastor the whole community, not just be a chaplain for those who were inside the walls of the church. And all this comes together for this. God has entrusted each of us with relationships to vulnerable people. And these relationships will be both challenging and rewarding. These relationships will be both challenging and rewarding. So in a moment, we're going to have a very specific invitation. We have another video for the summers that will start in just a minute, but I want to just leave our time this morning with this statement. Y'all, we have to stop camping up with people that we like, with people who are like us, with people who are in the same socioeconomic realm. Please receive this. Please build your tribe. And yes, your tribe should be filled with mostly people who you find great connectivity to, who can help you become a better version of yourself. Like, your tribe matters. I'm not talking about your tribe. I'm talking about the reality that more often than not, we really just want to be in relationship with people who are like us. And y'all, that's not how heaven is going to be. It's not how heaven is going to be. When Jesus went to the cross, and we're going to talk about this in great depth next Sunday, the death that He died on the cross for us was not simply for the forgiveness of our sins. It was for that, and that is an unbelievably amazing gift. But on the cross, Jesus defeated evil. evil is defeated because of Jesus. Does it mean that evil doesn't still have influence? Of course. Once again, we're going to get into all this at Easter. But y'all, that is the best news ever. Something beyond space and time happened on the cross, and evil was defeated. At some point, Jesus is going to come back, and we're going to see the fullness of what that looks like, because the influence of evil will be gone. But right now, we, because we have chosen to believe in Jesus, are completely free from evil. It doesn't mean that it won't influence us. It doesn't mean that it's not present, y'all. But we're supposed to go into a hurting, lost world and bring the best news in the history of mankind ever to everyone, everywhere. When Joshua was walking the face of the earth and caring for the chosen people, it was important because God instructed them for them to camp up. They had to be safe because they were in a time in the world when the biggest armies and the most menacing people had power and sway. And so it mattered because God needed them to be protected so that they could be the people eventually to bring the truth of the one true God to the world. But we don't live in that time anymore. And what Jesus did on the cross was for everyone, everywhere. And Jesus gives us really clear instructions in Matthew 25 that we are supposed to care for the weak and the hurting and the vulnerable and the orphan and the widow and the people who are in prison and the people who are struggling. And y'all, we're not doing a great job. Like Nathan said last week, we shouldn't have a DFACS. We should be the ones who are dealing with caring for orphans. Now, we can't go back in time, so this is the time that we have. But I'm going to challenge you that we might find that our willingness to get out of our comfort and convenience is exactly what the Lord can use to help us become a better version of ourselves for the sake of building His kingdom, which cares desperately for vulnerable people on this earth. Let's check out the next video from the Summers.
All right, so over the last few Sundays, we've gotten to know about you guys and your ministry, but we haven't really dug into the ministry that you have out of your own home. So I would love to hear more about how you guys got called into foster care ministry.
We got a call about the Job with Jesus film, The Role, and that ended up moving us here to Atlanta. And we didn't know anyone in Atlanta. And so happenstance, the first couple that we kind of got to know well, the wife was a social worker. And so if you had asked me at that time how many kids were in foster care, I'd have said, I don't know, a couple hundred. Like, I just had no idea the scope and the crisis of kids that were coming into care. And so she just was talking about her job, and it was like the Lord just laid that on our hearts. We couldn't shake it.
What were some fears or maybe nervousness that you experienced before stepping into this, before inviting kids into your home?
You know, you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
So we were fearful of everything to begin with. We weren't thinking about having another kid. And so we were a little bit like, what does this mean? We ended up with FaithBridge Foster Care, and it's been unbelievable. It's been great. It's been great.
Hard,
great, but great. Yes.
And people tell us all the time, oh, I could never foster because I could never get attached. That would be too brutal.
Yep.
And I understand that. One thing I like to say is I feel like the child deserves that level of attachment where you're the adult in the room.
Right.
And at the end of the day, you could get some counseling. The church can help you with that. You could work through those really hard feelings.
Yeah.
But this child deserves, for that time that they're in your home, for you to get so attached that it would break your heart if they left.
Yeah. All right, so we hear people talk about fostering being really hard, but we know that you guys didn't do this alone. You had some community. So can you kind of tell us what that community looked like?
I mean, humbling for us, I think, especially not having family nearby, that God has really raised up a community of people to rally around us. I remember one year we got a set of twins right around Christmas, and we posted on one of the local Facebook pages, and within a matter of about 6 hours, we had another crib, we had another car seat, we had bottles, we had clothes, we had diapers.
Yeah.
From people that just said, yes, hey, we want to help.
God has promised that he would give you what you need to what he's called you to. And that's been true in our lives, from resources like educational advocacy to therapists to friends letting us vent to people bringing us food, like we've talked about a lot, clothes and diapers and cribs all along the way.
And there's other people that help out in like a respite sense, right? They go, hey, we want to give you guys a date night. Can we come watch your kids? Before we fostered, no one ever called and asked if they could come watch my kids. But because we're in this space, we have people that are willing to give us that gift.
And we are a large family, 6 kids total. And in our journey, God has blessed us in huge ways of people coming alongside us, not only for what the kids in foster care needed, but our biological kids too. They have blessed us and loved on our family as a whole. And that's really made it sustainable for us, because our whole family is in this together. It is our whole family's ministry. And so that's been an additional blessing that the community of Christ has given us.
So how would you say becoming a foster and adoptive parent, how has that shaped your view of God's love for you?
I mean, the Bible talks a lot about adoption, like we're adopted into God's family, you know, we're heirs with Christ. That took like on a whole new meaning for us as we've gone through this, because they got a new birth certificate. So in the eyes of the state, they're our kids. Our names are on their birth certificates. And I think on my spiritual birth certificate was the world. And because the great exchange has been made, right? Because we're a part of his family in his kingdom, now his name is the parent.
I actually got my first tattoo is the international symbol for adoption, and that was multi-layered, multifaceted reason for that tattoo. But one of those was all the work that God did in my heart to really solidify what adoption into the family of God looks like. Wow. And it's a permanent symbol for me, just like a birth certificate. It's a permanent symbol in the eyes of the state.